So this is how you assemble the foot drive or the motor box for the B2 Pro. There's two flavors, a front left and back right, and a front right and back left. So I call them flubber and furball for whatever reason. So the first thing I do is decide which one I'm building. In this case, I'm building the front left, back right. And I take the aluminum plates and make it so it lines up with the mounting holes, and then make sure your back plate lines up with the mounting hole here. And the reason this is important is these are all basically mirror images of each other, so you can build the motor going this way towards the box or away. So if you look here, they're mirror images of each other, but the pieces are all identical. So you have to make sure you don't fake yourself out and build something that looks like it'll go together, but then you'll find the holes won't align, and you have to take it all apart. So what I did was I marked where all of the pieces go. So I labeled this front, that front, and this one I didn't label rear, but I put a line so that the holes, the mounting holes, all align with each other. The problem is this piece is not centered in the motor box. The aluminum plate's not centered in the motor box, but the plastic piece is. So that's why you have an offset hole, and it'll go together each way, but it'll be wrong one way. So the other thing I did is I marked all the holes. If you didn't get them pre-tapped, these are all M3s, these are all M5s, M3s. For these end plates, they're all M4s. And the front one, I just reduced the part count. It has a hole, but there's no reason for that hole other than it's cheaper to buy 8 of the same one than it is to have 4 and 4. But that back hole does get tapped with M4 all the way around. So, and this one is all through hole, and you actually, I lied. There's M4s on these here. 4, 4, 4, and 4. And it helps if you doodle mark it on the inside so that nobody will ever see it. But the process for putting it together, once you've solved all of that, there's also mirror images of this gear. So I just was making sure all of the parts aligned so you have the right pieces going in the right places. Because this also, although in the center, when you mirror it, if you put this together backwards, this won't line up with that. So I took great care to make sure everything lined up. And then once you solve all the puzzle pieces of which way each part is oriented and which version of the box you're building, the left or the right, or front left back right, or front right back left, then you can go ahead and proceed to install it. So even though I started out by bolting this on, it's easier to assemble without it. So I'm just going to quickly take that off. These are M4 flathead 15 bolts. And the reason you want to use 15s is that way it doesn't go deeper in and then impact or bulge this. I guess I could put a hole in there so you could have a longer bolt, but maybe at a later time. So we'll start out now that we have everything sorted. Probably the longest part of the build is putting this plate together. And even though I've assembled this just for orientation, again, I'm going to take this off because the most important thing you can do right is install the linear rails perfectly aligned to each other, and I'll attempt to do that. So we'll grab our linear rails, or guides, I don't know what you call them, and these get M310 bolts, and I'm just going to do the middle hole at first. And don't tighten it. Another M310, these are cap screws. You could use flathead screws if you don't have the M310 cap screws. You'll just have to have a little bit longer screw. So just kind of snug these down so that you can rotate them. And I'm just going to put 2 screws in each one to start with, because what I want to do is align it using some 1, 2, 3 blocks. I think that's what they're called. So I can do an alignment with each other and with the overall structure. So this is a little bit of an art to doing this. You want to kind of square up this to that, and then make sure there's no gaps, and then tighten this down snug enough so it doesn't rotate, and then do the same one here. Then we're going to do the same procedure here. There, that way it gets mounted square. And again, I'm not killing this, I'm just tightening it down so they don't wiggle around. And these should be parallel to each other so they don't bind. You don't want them at an angle. And they seem to be, so I'm going to tighten these down a little harder. And then I'm going to double check that what I did seems correct, and that seems correct, and that seems correct. All right, that's easy enough. And now I'll just put the last 2 screws in and then give them all a good torque. I'm still in the testing phases, but once you get comfortable that you have these mounted correctly, a little Loctite on each screw in the whole build would not be a bad idea. So I think what happened here is, although they're square, I'm gonna have to do it again because there's a little play this way and they're too far towards me. So this is all part of the, so I guess I'll put all 3 screws in, keep them light, just in, because you can see there's a little play in the manufacture of these rails. Okay, we're all wiggly. Get my box out. And for what it's worth, I'll try to center the screw heads. It's just a, because that's where they're kind of supposed to be, is centered on those tapped holes. Just a light so it doesn't slide around. Actually, I'm going to tighten this so I don't bump it, because that is square. That looks pretty good. Tighten the center one first. Then we can check that this one is square. And it is. So we'll tighten this one down. Okay, now we should be done with these blocks. At least for this part of the build. Give each one of these a good. Make sure they're not loose or don't become loose. All right, so now we'll just build out the rest of the face here. Notice these holes have a clocking to them. There's two different types of gears. Make sure you get the correct gear rack with the correct plate. And these are M5 10 millimeter or 10 millimeter. I just happen to have blue ones in stock. They look cool. All right, the last little bit is to put the stoppers on. Now you're going to take the bottom ones off when it comes time to install this onto the ankle. And for this, I'm just going to use M4 8 millimeter. So we need 4 per side. And the orientation of these doesn't really matter. The whole goal of these things is to have hard stops so your shuttle doesn't run off the edge. But I do try to make them look good, so there's a little U shaped. I try to make the U go to the outside for no particular reason, just for symmetry, I guess. And these parts are pre-threaded, so they'll go in fairly easy. And again, you don't have to crank these down because they're going to come off when you assemble the final assembly. You just don't want the screws to get lost if they get bumped or whatever. So U shape to the outside. You can tighten these down fully because you won't have access to these bolts later. Because they're going to be covered inside the motor box. Okay, so this part is complete. And so now we're going to build from the top of the box up. So this hole here needs to align with that hole there. So these are all going to be, you can use M412s. It'll stick out a little bit on the other side, or you can use M410s, but you're not going to get as much thread being engaged. So M412s it is, because the motor or the foot shell mount has a hollow spot, so you've got room for these screws to stick out. And then one more in the back. Just double check these are all secure. You don't have to kill it because you're only doing tapped aluminum and it's not that thick, and you can easily strip these out. So take careful note of that. Then the next thing is make sure this line here that goes on the inside. And we're going to attach that, and M412s will do well for this one. For the back, I'm going to use 10s because I really don't want it to stick beyond. I don't want that screw sticking out because the back of the foot shell mount is going to be flush with that. I need a different tool. Need my little socket ball end so I can come at it with an angle because it's binding with the other. The M410. All right, and now the front. And I'm going to go back to the 12s because it doesn't matter if these stick out. Mind the Fs. So you notice these are not evenly spaced just because of the way it assembles and where the overlaps are. you can put it together upside down and it will be wrong. There we go. And I'll just give a nice little tug on each one of these, not too much. And believe it or not, we're almost done. So now we take the wheel well and just slide it in. And if you did it right, this will line up. If you didn't do it right, it won't line up. So go back and figure out what went wrong. Then we attach this plate here. I always recommend doing the center hole first. That way it ensures you don't have it mirrored. I'm using a 20mm flathead M4. And then for the rest of them, I'm just going to use M8 buttons. Oh, I made a mistake. I forgot to install 2 of the horizontal bars. That's the nice thing about this, it's fairly easy to correct your mistakes. So these, you can use M412s. Okay, now we're ready for the wheel well. Align these holes so that they're on the side of the gear rack. I'm just kind of slide it in. All right, so now we put on this part using M8 button heads and a single M420 flathead. I usually do the middle first. That makes sure that it goes into something, because if not, you've assembled it backwards. And then just M48 buttons. I need 4 of those. And then for here, just make sure there's no gap between here and here. That means you've got everything lined nicely. And you can torque these down. And finally, the last aluminum plate goes all with M48s. So again, I do the middle one first, because if you see, you can see that hole's lining up. If you try to put the plate on backwards, that hole doesn't line up. So that's kind of a good assurance that you're assembling it correctly. And then just tighten. Then we have one last step, and it's just to keep this little flap here from bowing out. So I've got some M4 6 screws that will keep that so it behaves itself. Go. Actually, I got a little bit of an angle. Just hand start it. I'm not quite lined up with the hole. That's what the problem is. There we go. There we don't go. Looks right. That's what's happening. The plastic is kind of pushing my bolt out of alignment. This was supposed to be the easy part. Let me just try another one. This was unexpectedly hard. All the other ones I did went in nicely. Oh, I know the problem. I didn't tap those holes. Remember I marked them earlier? So that's why that's not working. Yeah, these are all untapped. Sorry about that. That'll make them easier to install. And the last step is to install these M4 6mm screws just to keep this plastic from flopping out of position or warping and impairing or impeding the wheel. Oh, that's an 8. Oh no. It's nothing really wrong with an 8. It just sticks out and has something to poke your finger with. This will stick out less. All right, that's the motor box construction. And the last bit is where we started. We're going to attach the mount for the foot shell using M415s. And remember, we tapped this last hole and it should line everything up like that. And then one in the end. Just snug these up and your motor box construction is complete. And I just have this little wheel pattern so you know how the wheel should look. Front left, they should be pointing to the inside of the droid. So that helps you make sure you don't get the wrong foot on the wrong wheel. And this is just the last one here. So the foot shell has magnets in it. Didn't have room for magnets, so I have steel screws that the magnets will attach to that go here. Actually, this might be a 10. I guess I should have tapped this hole first. It's relatively hard to put in. So the foot shell fits kind of tightly, so the fact that there's not a lot of magnet surface area is fine. It just keeps it from rattling. All right, so there you have it. The MotorBox construction complete. Now I have 4 of them built. We'll move on to the next step.